Good afternoon from Washington, D.C. This is Ed Salzberg. I'm the Managing Director of the Security and Sustainability Forum, and I welcome you to our webinar on energy democracy, which is hosted by Island Press, an environmental publishing company that we work with quite closely. Their books are really tremendous, and they bring some of the best people in the field to address really important issues like this one. I'm really pleased that Denise Fairchild, who's the president of Emerald Cities Collaborative, is working with me and Island Press to organize the session, and she's going to be the moderator for it, along with panelists Ashura Lewis and Vivian Huang. It's going to be a tremendous session. We've run through the slides, and there's just really a strong message here. Energy is not a national problem in the United States. We have plenty of energy. We have plenty of technology to get that energy distributed. What we don't have is governance and guidance in place so that that energy is distributed equitably, fairly, and cost effectively. So this is our 154th webinar, I believe, and we cover the issues on the left, all of the important issues of our time, the impacts to society from disruptions and from a wide variety of threats. If you're registered for the webinar, we invite you to sign up for our alerts, but please share the webinar slide and webinar program with your colleagues. We have 21,000 subscribers right now. We'd like to get a lot higher because everything we do is free, everything we do is high quality, and what we're trying to do is educate a large population across the country on the issues that are really important to this generation and the generations to come. We work closely with Island Press, and they have a program I want to just call your attention to, their Urban Resilience Project that Laurie Mazur runs, and they invite all of you to participate in the program. It's an outreach and a data gathering and information gathering program. You can participate and share your story and in the work that you're doing or the work that's being done within your community. You can get involved through resilience, an email to resilience@islandpress.org. The genesis of this webinar is really the book that Denise co-edited, Energy Democracy, which Ashura and Vivian contributed to. Island Press is offering a discount on their website using the discount code that you can see on the screen. So it's a really terrific book. I've read through many of the chapters, and I just really highly recommend it. This is how the session is going to work. I'm going to kick it off and then introduce Denise. Denise is going to introduce each of the panelists, and then we're going to run through three presentations, one that Denise makes, and then followed by Ashura and then Vivian. We'll be hosting a discussion among the three panelists, three questions that they would like to discuss among themselves. Please put your questions in the question box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. You can type them right in on the GoToWebinar question window. You can download the slides right now at the GoToWebinar window in the download in the handout section, so please do that. The video will be posted in a couple of days, and one thing I really would like your help on is to take the brief exit survey. It'll only take you 2 minutes, but it helps us quite a lot. We usually get about 30% compliance with that. I'd like to get well over that for this session. I'd really like to hear from you on what you liked about the session, what you're taking away from it, the important points you think you can use in your community, and then also suggestions for future webinars. I could go on for quite a while about Denise's accomplishments in this area. She's the founder and president of Emerald Cities Collaborative. It's a national nonprofit organization based in Washington with affiliates in major urban centers across the United States, and she's advancing the mission to green our cities in an equitable way. Previous to that, she founded and directed the Community and Economic Development Department, the Los Angeles Trade Technical College, and I could go on for quite a while on her accomplishments in this field. But I'm going to turn this over to Denise and have her introduce the panel and get this moving.
Great, thank you so much, Ed, and I'd like to also thank Island Press for this opportunity to discuss our book, Energy Democracy, and I will be with you through this webinar, and we have two amazing authors that will also join that I'm going to introduce right now. They're going to provide you with powerful stories and examples of energy democracy and what's taking place around the country. First, I'll introduce Ashura Lewis. Ashura is based in Jackson, Mississippi. She's the communications manager for One Voice, which is a community-based organization working for racial, social, environmental justice in the South. So Ashura, give us a couple of more sentences about your own background.
Absolutely, and thank you again for the invitation to participate in this event. As it was said, I am the communications manager for One Voice, which is a nonprofit civic engagement that's actually a newcomer to the energy democracy stage. However, because I contribute to the content of all that we write, I consider all of our programs kind of my baby, and nothing is more personal to me than our energy democracy work. And I hope to communicate some of our strategies and definitely some of my passion in the presentation to come.
I've seen you perform before, Ms. Lewis, and I'm sure you will this afternoon. Next, we have Vivian Yi Huang, and Vivian is the campaign and organizing director for the Asian Pacific Environment Network, which is a powerful base-building organization in the East Bay or in San Francisco Bay Area. Vivian, please tell us a little bit about yourself as well as APEN.
Yeah, great. Hello, everyone. Glad that you all could join this call, and I'm very appreciative to be talking about energy democracy with everyone today. Yes, I come from an immigrant family, and at APEN we work with immigrants and refugees around advancing environmental and social justice.
Great. Thank you so much. So, let's see, we're trying to advance and get this conversation started. Maybe a little delay here.
Control now, Denise.
All right, so it's not working here. So my friends, I'm having a little trouble. Okay, so let's get started. Our goal today is really, well, if you were to ask Island Press, is to get you to buy the book. Okay, I'll start with that, buy the book. But more importantly, we hope that by the end of today's webinar, you'll really join the energy democracy movement as a solution to the existential crisis that we're all facing with respect to our environment, our economy, and even the social fabric of our society. And so I'd like to provide the opening framing for energy democracy in the book, and then we'll go into a deeper sort of case study of what's happening in Mississippi and then what APEN is doing on the West Coast. But I think we'll start with what everybody knows. We know that there's a clean energy revolution taking place at all levels. It focuses on renewables and renewable technologies as a solution to climate change. We've got sort of an all-in strategy. We've got the public sector. Cities and states are pushing to cut fossil fuels as a source of energy. You have utilities. They're facing expiring facilities and consumer demands for renewables. And so they have to, as a byproduct of demand, developing new energy models. And they're doing it to develop and to own utility-scale renewables or to service distributed energy systems. We have big green organizations that are also pushing for clean energy future. And they have there's a number of movements underway. There's 100% renewables effort, Ready for 100. There's a Keep It in the Ground effort. It's a real alternative to the idea of an all-in approach, an all-in strategy you're getting from community organizations. No, it's not all-in. It's 100% renewables. At the heart of these efforts are technology solutions to address climate change, which is caused by the combustion of fossil fuels. Our book takes a different approach. It draws your attention to another clean energy movement taking place, a clean energy revolution that's called the energy democracy movement. And it's an emergent movement, but we're seeing seeds that are taking place in rural, suburban, and urban communities across the country. It's a movement that exists and that is growing. Our premise is that when you democratize energy, you get a different outcome. That is, when you take decision-making power out of the hands of the government, out of the hands of utility companies, energy or environmental professionals, when you allow communities to decide their own clean energy future, and when you especially put racial, social, and economic justice at the center of the energy revolution, then the frameworks, the strategies, and the outcomes are different. So this is, if we go back, so this is what we did in our book, Energy Democracy, and lifting up the voices of monolingual Asian immigrants, which you'll hear from Vivian today. When you give voice to rural Mississippians, when you give voice to labor unions, when you give voice to high school youth and students, or even suburban moms, then suddenly you see things very differently. And so what we understand as sort of the carbon emission and climate crisis that we're in has a different flavor. You start looking at the values that are driving this extractive economy. You look at energy, clean energy revolution as an extractive economy where mass production, mass consumption, the mass accumulation of wealth through fossil fuel extraction and combustion is the problem. It is an economic justice problem, which is destroying not only our environment, but our economy. When you give voice to democratize energy, you begin to see environmental, sort of the energy issue from an environmental justice lens, where in fact a disproportionate impact of climate change happens in low-income communities of color. When you give voice, when you democratize energy, you start seeing things in terms of health inequities and through a health justice lens. And you'll hear more about this when our panelists, when we start the panel conversation. But clearly, minorities, poor communities, they breathe dirtier air. We face higher levels of impacts of heat wave and other conditions when we don't even have air conditioning and have preconditioning health conditions of high blood pressure, diabetes, chronic health diseases, and asthma. When you democratize energy, you see clean energy from the standpoint of an economic justice lens and economic inequities. When the lowest income communities, no matter what color, are emitting the least amount of carbon, causing the least amount of problems, yet having the greatest, bear the greatest burdens. You begin to understand clean energy from a climate justice lens, which is it's a picture of Katrina, and we know that story all too sadly, and we have seen it even as recently as this past fall at places in Puerto Rico and other parts of our border, our coastal cities. And you understand it also from a climate resilience lens, where if we want to ward off and defend ourselves and adapt to climate change, that we have inadequate physical infrastructure, we don't have weak levees, we don't have tree canopies, we don't have housing conditions that will really put us in a position to be resilient against climate change. So we understand the problems differently, but the good news is that we also see the possibilities. Energy Democracy in this book and the stories that are told, the theoretical frameworks that are offered to you, really begins to start with understanding the values that underlie a new energy system. The reality is, this is a once in 100-year, once in a century opportunity to reimagine, re-engineer, and rebuild American economy through a new kind of energy system. But fundamental to that, under energy democracy, the new value systems, where it is not about the commodification of energy, but it is understanding energy as part of the commons, something that we need to be sharing and not exploiting or extracting. We understand that that in addition to having new values, that we also need to have new leadership as a part of this sort of new energy democracy future, and new governance structures that also involves building the base and building grassroots leadership for folks that are from all walks of life, that we have to invest in the training and education for this new leadership and this new governance structure. this energy democracy and the possibilities is really about investing in the organizing and the resistance about dirty energy and the old way of supplying our basic needs and the use value of energy. And it also means prioritizing where we make our investments and making sure that we're making critical investments in critical facilities, our low-income, affordable housing, our public housing. And these are hard deals to do. These are probably the most complicated deals to do because of the leverage financing that goes into it. And how do you build out and create energy options for communities that don't even own the real estate? So how do we, and clearly from the public housing standpoint, we know these are the last to actually get any help when it comes to extreme weather events that occur in any city. It also means that there are opportunities for policies that's pushing for new institutions, locally owned and controlled energy systems. It means that you're building institutions like community choice aggregation, and there's a chapter written by my co-editor about community choice and how we actually put community in community choice to create new energy institutions. It's also about new systems and creating distributed energy that is not only creating not only decentralized energy options, but also making them community-owned, community-controlled systems. And energy co-ops are fundamental. There's a couple of chapters that really speak to what's going on in terms of building the co-op movement around the country and the process that it takes and the politics and the politicizing that's happening in that process. And then it's also about making sure that there's a just transition. And there's a chapter that's also talking about what is just transition and understanding that this vision for energy democracy is not it's not to create winners and losers, but this vision is really about making sure that the economy that we built around dirty energy and the people that have sort of upheld this on behalf of society as a whole will be able to transition into a new clean energy economy, and that people that have historically been on the periphery of the mainstream economy will also have a chance to participate in building this new economy. So this is sort of the essential framework, and you're going to hear, and we'll go into some detail further when we start hearing the two stories that I'd like to now ask Vivian to talk about. Well, we'll start first with Ashura. And Ashura, tell us a little bit or a lot about One Voice and how you are making energy democracy happen in the Mississippi environment.
All right, no small task you're asking for there, but I'll do the best I can. As I mentioned earlier, One Voice has been active for over a decade in different areas of social justice and progressive, leadership and moving the entire state, and with the state, so goes the country forward. But energy democracy is actually fairly new to us, only started in our third year now. And it came from the place that we all start. I think everyone on the panel and everyone listening in all understand that when it comes down to it, it is important for communities not only to know, but to also understand and wield their own power over energy and energy resources. And it's through that power that these same communities that have historically been ignored or abused, neglected, left on the wayside, left out of the conversation, that these communities, once they have that knowledge, that understanding, and that power, they can wrest back control over their lives and their finances, and they can start to shape their future in ways they may not be able to imagine right now. To that end, One Voice decided to kind of start our energy democracy work around electric cooperatives. Now, if you're like me, you might not know a whole lot about electric cooperatives, so it was definitely a learning experience from the beginning. And I'd like to give just a little bit of background before I hop into the current work. So when it comes to electric cooperatives, they were started in, got a slide too far. Let's see. Trying to get ahead of myself. Well, electric cooperatives started shortly after the New Deal with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And the purpose of them at the time was to basically light up, the rural nation. Because the houses were so far apart and incomes were so low, it's mostly an agricultural community, a lot of corporations and energy providers were not interested in setting up the infrastructure and using the expense to light so very few homes. And so it came to the conclusion that the best way to illuminate the rural areas was to create a collective where all the people that would be receiving the service had a hand in building and maintaining that service. And the first electric cooperative in the nation was actually in the rural town of Alcorn, Mississippi. Now, these cooperatives were designed from on the outset to work with certain principles that promoted teamwork, participation, democratic participation at that, community involvement, and other positive, progressive community building exercises. And in some instances, this was extremely successful. However, due to the complicated and racially laden history of the South and Mississippi in particular, things didn't quite go according to plan. What it does mean is at its start, every person in an electric cooperative that receives power and pays a utility bill for that power is a member owner of the electric cooperative. This is something that is the primary and most fundamental aspect of electric cooperatives as opposed to people that get their power through a corporate source. However, this fact of ownership is, we discovered, is not very well understood, is not very well known, and it's that key aspect of education that has led to change for us and our work in Mississippi. Here you're looking at a map of all the electric cooperative territories in the U.S. and in Mississippi in particular. As you can tell, that's a lot of blue. There are a lot of member owners out there. This map shows the depth and breadth of the electric cooperatives across our nation, and while it's worthy to note that obviously this is no small service provider, I think it is far more relevant to our work today to know that out of all the counties in the United States that are federally identified as persistent poverty counties, 93% of them are serviced by electric cooperatives.
You want to repeat that again? And it's a great statistic.
That 93% of all the persistent poverty counties identified in the United States, they're serviced by electric cooperatives. So in case you're thinking about that, you're seeing how wide the electric cooperative territory is. You're looking at the fact that they service mostly agricultural and rural traditional areas. 93% of them are serviced by electric cooperatives. You might start thinking along the terms of, well, what state has the most persistent poverty counties, which is most dependent on this electric cooperative service? And I have an answer for you. That answer is Mississippi. Mississippi has more persistent poverty counties identified federally than any other state in the union. And as a result, Mississippi also has 98% of their persistent poverty counties serviced by electric cooperatives. So nearly 100% of the persistent poverty counties in our state are serviced by these cooperatives. And even more than that, there is nearly half of all the electricity generated and serviced in the entire state is serviced by electric cooperatives. So it's a very significant and very impactful presence within the community. Now, just because it has such a large contribution, just because it has this large hold on our state, doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem. As I mentioned, the cooperatives were designed to be problem solvers, to be uplifting in the community. But tie that into the history of the South, and you see a different image begin to form. We see some systemic issues starting at this very inception, where certain people, mainly landholders, title holders, money holders, the controllers of the economy, turned out to be the ones that began to control the electric cooperative. And instead of being about ownership and teamwork and equality about the power, it became more about power consumption, consolidation, and the lack of transparency. And it didn't become an empowerment vehicle for community economies. It became a source of economic vulnerability that still pervades to this day. So within this shadow of racism and low wealth and the difficulties just of rural communities, you can see you're starting to build a recipe for disaster. For example, when you compare to the rest of the nation, the average income for a Mississippian is 28% lower than the national average. And yet, in Mississippi, we have spoken with cooperative members, and from them we have discovered that some of them spend up to 42% of their income just on electricity bills. I want to take a moment and think about that. Nearly half of your income dedicated just to keep the lights on in your house. So this became a source of major economic insecurity, major economic vulnerability for the entire community, and it's self-perpetuating in these persistent poverty counties because it contributes to a generational poverty that's very hard to escape from, despite the vehicle that electric cooperatives could be. So now we see that the math's not quite working out. Something's definitely hinky on the field. So One Voice decided at that time we needed more information. And what we decided to do was conduct listening tours. We went around our state, we went into the neighborhoods, we knocked on doors, and we listened to their stories, because it is our deepest conviction that the communities that are suffering under a particular hardship or dealing with a certain issue are the best to appreciate what it is they want resolved. They are the people that know the problem best. They may not have access to the resources that will provide them a solution, but they are most intimately familiar with the actual issues at hand, and not someone coming into the community to tell them what their problem is. And so taking that conviction and that knowledge, we went into the community and we listened to what they had to say, and they told us of their cooperative and some of the going-ons that didn't seem quite right, but they honestly just didn't know how they were supposed to operate, what they were entitled to, how far their power did extend. And so after a year of listening and researching and then listening some more, we decided to come up with a plan. And that plan was to target several cooperatives within the state. We chose 9, and those 9 are Coahoma, Tallahatchie, North Central, Delta, Twin, the confusingly named 4-county, Yazoo Valley, Southwest, and Magnolia EPAs. And there were several that we could have chosen from, but we focused on these 9 in particular because they were either majority African American or at the very least had one majority African American district. And so we began to talk more extensively with the communities and people in these communities. We started to get a feel for how Coahoma's issues might be different from Tallahatchie's, how Delta dealt with it and had fewer run-ins with board members than Twin County, and began to see the individual character of these communities start to evolve. So we were looking now at, okay, we know what the problem is. They've shared this with us, that we know what solutions they want. What is the best way to approach that? And of course, we're going to fall back to our understanding of community organizing. But we also decided to tie into this something that One Voice has worked in the field of leadership. And we have several leadership institutes, and we thought this actually would be a very good vehicle for the community and cooperative members. So we designed the Electric Cooperative Leadership Institute, or ECLI for short. And ECLI is a short 6-month in-depth member education program. And it teaches members about their roles, their rights and responsibilities within their cooperative. It teaches them cooperative basics. Participants also receive information on understanding cooperative finances, bylaws and bylaw interpretation, and the role of government regulation and taxation. Now, even just saying that right now, it sounds like very dry and boring stuff. And as a person that actually had to read all the bylaws, I can tell you it most certainly is. However, you would be amazed and astonished, I know I was, when we attended the and conducted the ECLI sessions, to watch the community members so eagerly eat this information up. They were hungry for it. They wanted to know more because they knew within that knowledge there was more power to be had. There was more ownership to take place for their community and their cooperative. And one of the most enlightening, one of the most monumental moments in my mind was the day they honestly understood and integrated into themselves that because they paid a bill to that cooperative, because they received electricity, they were a member owner. They owned part of that electric company. And to see that, very almost literal light bulb go off over their heads was a true aha moment. I know among our community, we talk about transformative issues, transformative moments. This might not have been a societal transformative moment, but it was definitely a transformative moment for that individual at that moment. And those are the things that will sustain them and move them forward, long after One Voice is out of the picture, long after the board, has made their elections. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, ECLI sessions. While they're there, they're not just learning strictly about the cooperatives in general, but they are learning about their cooperative specifically. And this way they can add their experience and their insight to the bland facts and create a fuller picture of their entire unique cooperative community. Participants also learn about best practices from other electric cooperatives, and they research innovative ways that some cooperative members in different places and different states have provided themselves with more economic opportunities. Lastly, but far from the least important, we also teach them about community organizing, and this is done with civil rights icon Hollis Watkins Mohammed, and he brings his wealth of experience of not only organizing for different social justice issues, but organizing specifically in Mississippi, as it tends to be its own beast with its own history. Now, in our first cohort 2 years ago, we had 37 participants. Last year, that number increased by 14%, and we had 43 participants to complete the program. And now we're preparing for our third year and expect the numbers to also increase. But what we're most excited about is that 2 of the targeted cooperative areas, Twin County and Yazoo Valley, have both decided among themselves that they want to run someone for board representation. Now, this is particularly important to us because even though these cooperative areas are majority African American or have a distinct section that's African American, their board doesn't reflect that same demographic representation, as you can imagine. It is less than 10% of African American representation on the board, and if you count women, which make up half the population of the state, they make up less than 4% of the representation on the boards. So for the cooperative members who have attended ECLI and have learned about their cooperative and what it means to be a member owner, to decide for themselves that yes, they understand this and they want someone to run who represents their interest, is a very exciting moment for us. And so we're beginning to work with them on some strategizing and some organizing and how to address the bylaws for election processes so they can run somebody for a board position. Also, another point of success is in Coahoma County. One of the local community colleges had a campus radio station that was in need of repairing and updating.
You have a slide for this, I think?
No, I don't. I'm sorry. The president of that college was a participant in our ECLI program, and he learned, that through that the college itself was a receiver of electricity from the cooperative, and therefore it was a member owner entity. And it had certain, privileges that could be granted for that. So this president contacted the board. He stated his need as a member owner. He explained how assisting the college was consistent with the 7 principles that guide electric cooperatives, and the board agreed with him. The cooperative gave the college a grant to cover the radio station's needs. Now, I will admit that the board members were there to hand over the very large check in front of many, many cameras, but nothing's ever completely free. But it was his knowledge gained through ECLI and through his understanding of what relationship he had with his cooperative that allowed him to find those funds and to apply for them. Another success story comes from 4 County in Shuqualak, or Sugarlac if you're a local. A member and ECLI participant was frustrated because there wasn't really any appropriate or safe recreation areas for their neighborhood children. And once again, because of her time in ECLI, because of the things she learned and how the cooperative operates, she was able to apply and receive a cooperative grant that provided $7,000 for funding for a new playground. Now, does this solve the problems of their skyrocketing electricity bills? Is this end, racial disparities and discrimination and racism? Hardly. But every step forward is more ground that's gained, and it starts with knowledge, it moves on to ownership, it continues on through empowerment, and ends with democratic control. And so we definitely see some progress here. We are excited about going into our 3rd year of the Electric Cooperative Leadership Institute, and we look forward to seeing a lot more coming down the pipe and a lot of more changes in that board representation.
Thank you so much, Ashura. That's a very powerful story. I think everyone would agree about what energy democracy looks like on the ground. And it really is about governance it's more than just about the energy source, and we won't even get into the source of energy for many of these rural co-ops, particularly in the South, whether it's clean or dirty energy, but it's also about who's governing it, where are the dividends going, what are the costs of energy, what are the racial, social, and economic justice issues that are behind our energy infrastructure. So thank you for that. We'll have more conversation. But I'd love to turn it over to Vivian right now. And Vivian, a lot of your story is sort of a West Coast context, but it's in a context of health in many ways, and how you take a very complicated question or story of energy and bring this into your constituency and your community.
Great. Thank you so much, Denise. I'm very excited to be able to share some stories about the work that Asian Pacific Environmental Network is doing. I wanted to start out first by illustrating a little bit of the context of kind of what the current conditions are as we're talking about this movement that we're building around energy democracy. So this slide, basically it shows, I think, data that most folks would already know and intuitively know, is that when we're talking about issues like climate change, around pollution, that we know that it's low-income communities and communities of color that are hit and hurt first and worst, right? So this is a slide just showing that the greater number of greenhouse gas emitting facilities that there are in a particular area, the higher percentage of the surrounding community is going to be people of color and low-income people. And I think it just highlights the importance of really remembering the justice piece, as we're working towards energy democracy and addressing climate, is that the solutions really must start with those communities that are most impacted and really have a justice lens to them. Okay. And then I wanted to just give a sense of what we're up against. And so, one of the slides that I had was just an image of the explosion that happened at the Chevron refinery back in 2012. And really, I think it shows that, in the energy sector, we're going up against multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporations, right? And there's a whole long history of extraction of natural resources that were part of like empire building and colonization, and a continuation, right, of that extraction that's happening around the world. Of the 10 most profitable companies in the world, 3 of them are actually energy companies, including Chevron, right? And so we see that in our work around energy democracy, we're going against forces, right, that are very powerful, that are very well funded, that have made a lot of profit, both currently and historically. With this slide, I just wanted to show about how with corporations, they're not only polluting kind of the environment and affecting our health, but they're also trying to pollute our democracy, right? And so we see time and time again is that large energy corporations are actually using some of that profit and that money to influence decision makers in ways that are benefiting them. And so you see that with the lobbyist employers in Sacramento, that the different energy companies, are spending significant sums of money in order to try to influence state policy. We also saw locally in Richmond in 2014 that Chevron poured about $3 million into the local races for city council and mayor. And this is a city that has a population of about 100,000 people, so it amounted to about $70 per registered voter that they spent in that election. Unfortunately, fortunately, they were not successful in being able to influence that election cycle, but it just shows, I think, the sheer volume and amount of resources that they can actually expend into trying to influence our democracy and decision-making power. And so I think in recognition of the different forces that communities are fighting against. There was the first People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit that happened in 1991, and it was a way to actually pull together communities all over the country who were fighting environmental pollution in their local communities, and to come together to collaborate and form kind of a broader national environmental justice movement. And it was actually at this summit that many different organizations, including APEN, was born out of that conversation around the organizing that needed to happen around racial equity, immigrant rights, and environmental justice. And so from that summit, APEN was actually founded just 2 years later in recognition of the need to have an organization that fights for environmental justice in Asian immigrant and refugee communities. One of the key principles in our movement is this idea that we speak for ourselves. And that's very important because that's one of the underlying principles that guides so much of the work we do and really explains so much of the investment that we make to things like leadership development and making sure that people are actually on the front lines, are actually speaking and telling their stories and being part of the decision making. So I wanted to just provide a quote from one of our members who actually gave this testimony at a city council hearing in 2014 when the Chevron refinery was proposing to expand their refinery. Tong Soon said, "I am a refugee from Laos and settled in this city in 1975. Almost 40 years I have lived here. My mom saw the fire at the refinery. From that moment, she had difficulty breathing and died 2 months later. I've been coming to this meeting in City Council for many years. Chevron keeps saying they're going to fix this, fix that, they're going to make it safe, but they continue to cause problems, continue to have accidents, explosions, and suffering. The rich companies, the rich people only care about money and put our health in danger. If they did care, they would have fixed the problem, fixed the pipes. They would replace their equipment so it wouldn't cause explosions, so we wouldn't get sick. Who is causing the problem is the company. Who is making money is the company. Who is suffering, who is dying is us in the community." And I think Tong Soon's quote just really captures a lot of the conditions that community members feel that they are experiencing, and it really highlights the devastating impacts that people are feeling in terms of their health care, in terms of their family members, and seeing kind of how their whole communities are being impacted, right? And I think the quote also highlights how that the importance of organizing, right? Of people really having the agency and the power to be able to stand up in the face of the pollution that is happening, in their communities. I think Tong Soon really rightly shows that, they have an analysis of who is benefiting in this situation and who is not, right? And also they have ideas for what the solution should be and what they want to see happening in their communities. And I think that's a really important part of the work that we want to do as part of energy democracy, to make sure that that communities get to speak for themselves. And so next, I just wanted to highlight just our particular bases that we work with at APEN. So in Oakland, Chinatown, we work with a monolingual Cantonese and Mandarin speaking base. Historically, many of the issues and also currently that have faced these communities are around displacement and gentrification. So we've often had to battle a lot of evictions. And there's definitely a lot of gentrification happening right now in the Bay Area, as well as many cities across the country. On the right is a picture of one of our Richmond members. That's the other base. Historically, we've been organizing the Laotian refugee community, folks who all were displaced because of the wars in Southeast Asia and ended up settling in Richmond. And then we also have recently started organizing a Pan-Asian youth base, as well as a Pan-Asian API network of community leaders. And then in our work, one of a really important framework that Denise mentioned is also an important chapter in the Energy Democracy book is this idea of a just transition, right? So it's this idea of naming that we currently live in an extractive economy for all the things that I listed, around the extraction that's happening with the natural resources, as well as the way that only certain individuals or certain corporations are profiting at the expense of others, and the desire, I think, that we really view a living economy as the one that we want to go to, right? An economy that actually uplifts and supports the health and well-being of communities. And then as part of this strategy, as part of this framework, there's several different strategies to transition, right, between kind of our current extractive economy to the living economy. And this has been a really helpful framework developed by Movement Generation that we often use in our energy democracy work. So one of our core strategies is the organizing and leadership development work. So really it's the heart of our work, right? Our ability to be able to focus on immigrant and refugee communities. And so the work is actually run in, because all our bases speak, so many different languages and dialects. Usually our events are actually run in language, right? So our meetings in our Chinatown base, for example, are all run in Cantonese with some interpretation in Mandarin because they're two different dialects. But I think there are moments where we have joint events where we bring together kind of our Laotian and our Chinese base, and that's when it does feel a little bit like a mini UN, right? And so one of the photos in the previous slide was of a member wearing a headset, and so that's where, a lot of our events may be run in English, but it's being interpreted into 4 different languages and dialects through those headsets. Our members also play a really important role in doing the outreach and recruitment, so really helping us recruit new members to APEN. And of course, it's all about relationships, right? And so they're also building relationships with their neighbors, their other community members, and talking to them about APEN. As part of our leadership development, we have a whole training program called the APEN Academy. And so this photo on the bottom here is actually one of our APEN Academy meetings where Lisa, is standing up and asking a question as part of the discussion we were having. We also involve our members in decision-making and strategy development. And then they're also often leaders and spokespeople in highlighting the conditions in their community. Yeah, and these photos show some of the other ways that our members are involved. And so the photo in the middle actually shows a planning process where our members were actually involved in designing what planning should look like in Chinatown. And so these are all the ways that I think our members are able to model leadership development. And then we also have trainings on particular topics in addition to the APEN Academy, like the solidarity economy with our cooperatives work, but also like hot topics that are being discussed, like immigration reform, Black Lives Matter, the Standing Rock and No DAPL campaign. Then another sort of important organizing tactic is our ability to build political power statewide. And we do electoral organizing at both the local and statewide level. And so we have different candidate forums. We engage leaders in the canvassing and the door knocking. We also get ballot measures on the ballot, right? So locally in Oakland, we've pushed things around rent control and Kids First, and also tax measures on a statewide level. This slide is actually just showing about the importance of Asian American voters. They're the fastest growing population in the country, and many are not being contacted, in electoral organizing, even though there's high percentage of folks who actually identify as environmentalists. So 83% of Asian Americans identify as environmentalists, which is much higher than most other groups. The next slide is just showing that we also put together a statewide voter guide that is supported by many, many groups all across the state and is actually translated into 7 different languages that basically provides information how people should vote on different ballot measures. And then the next slide is kind of our third strategy, which is around policy making. So we do it at all different levels. So these are photos showing our members testifying, in Oakland and Richmond, in the Capitol and Sacramento. And I think the importance is just viewing this as like another part of our work of having people speak for themselves is a really powerful way to move a lot of elected officials and to have them understand the importance of addressing environmental justice. And then next slide. Okay. So I just wanted to offer a couple of things that we actually have been able to pass around energy democracy. So at the statewide level, our members pushed for AB 693, which is a program that gives $1 billion over 10 years to put solar on affordable housing buildings. And again, this is a way to look at how can we advance policy that actually distributes benefits from energy to low-income communities and to renters, rather than, I think, the model now where a lot of the folks that are benefiting tend to be homeowners. And then locally in Alameda County, we've been involved in developing the Community Choice program. And I think what was really exciting about this project was that we were part of a community and labor coalition that pushed for a unity platform that includes a local development business plan and provisions for supporting workers as part of a just transition. And so in this process, we were actually able to shift the narrative that comes up a lot around like jobs versus environment to really show that no, like community members and labor unions can work hand in hand in trying to achieve kind of the best and strongest program to advance energy democracy. And then one other really important part of our energy democracy work is looking at how to develop microgrids and community solar at the local level, right? So I think in the face of climate resilience and needing to address climate change impacts, it's really important that energy democracy is an important part of it. So we're looking at developing microgrids in places like Oakland Chinatown, which our base lives. And then we're also looking at how do we get community solar on individual sites so that we're actually generating renewable energy locally. So looking at partnering with other community organizations that have buildings or churches, and other places is a really important part of the strategy to make sure that energy democracy is tangible and real at the local level. Okay. And then finally, our fourth strategy I want to highlight was just the importance of alliance and movement building. As I always say, the members we work with are whole people. So that means they don't only just care about energy and the environment. They're also worried about housing. They're worried about employment. They're worried about healthcare, and so that there's an importance to having a really intentional intersectional lens to really understanding the connections between all these issues. And so because of that, APEN is part of a couple of very important national alliances, which is Climate Justice Alliance and Grassroots Asians Rising, that are all ways to make sure that we are intentionally providing an intersectional lens and analysis to all the connections between the different issues that our members face. And so that was basically my overview and snapshot of some of the different strategies that we use at APEN to advance energy democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. That was very powerful. A real demonstration of, again, what energy democracy looks like and how it's empowering communities to define its own energy future. So I know at this point in time we are looking for our audience to submit questions for us to answer. I think that Kyla is going to help us to sort through those. But in the meantime, as that's being compiled, hopefully, I have three questions, and I'll just put them all together, and Vivian and Ashura, you can answer any one of them. But there seems to be three core pillars of energy democracy. One is leadership development and base building. The second is intersectionality. And the third, which is the question we always get, is how is this work, this energy democracy work is slow and so and laborious, and we've got this climate crisis on our hand and climate urgency. So this notion of local ownership and local control, addressing the question of climate change and the need to address the crisis. So let me ask you each to pick whichever one you want. Leadership development, you both mentioned it being important. How challenging has it been to build leadership around this question of energy? Why is it important? And what would you recommend for others to do to strengthen and support investment in this work? And the other is intersectionality and how do you make those connections between energy and climate and economic and social justice?
Mhm.
I'll give it a try, see if I can maybe answer one, possibly tie them all together, because as you said, they are related. I would focus my attention for the leadership aspect in that it's one of the major decisions we took when we created ECLI was the leadership component, because we saw it as an opportunity not only to educate the community on, the specifics of their situation, how the cooperatives are run versus how they should be run and who should be running them, but also to extend that knowledge into the future, that it's not just a moment of clarity, but a entire progression that led toward a more democratic energy situation. And what I think is the most important facet of taking that approach is, first of all, to listen to the needs of the community members that you're speaking to. In fact, don't even speak for the first part of the interaction. Just hear what they have to say. And then once you've heard and you've listened to what their perception of the problem is and what they would like to see happen as part of the solution, then the next step from at that point would be to meet them where they are. And that is one of the particular considerations in energy democracy, because some of these terms, some of these concepts are rather, dry or technical, but it all boils down to how it affects the life of that particular individual in the community. How does that affect that individual's family? How does it affect that individual's community at large? Because there's always going to be an impact. And your way in is to listen to what their issue is and to connect that with the overarching issue of a lack of democratic control over energy and energy resources.
Great. Well, sure. I'm seeing one question that I might have just pitched to you while we're at it. It's a question that says, do the co-ops themselves participate in the One Voice camps? And I'm not sure if I'm looking at that question completely. From Crystal Nelson. Is that a question?
Okay, I can try that. If I'm understanding correctly, I think the person's asking, do representatives of maybe the co-op leadership or board members attend the Electric Cooperative Leadership Institute sessions? And the answer to that is no. Would love it if they came in, but without being too overly generalizing, most of the existing leadership in the cooperatives are not interested in sharing any of that leadership or control or power. And so their motives are counterintuitive to, counterproductive to the points of ECLI. So, but we do hope that that changes as participants and alumni, if you will, of the ECLI program begin to seek out board positions or other positions of leadership or employment within the cooperative. And they often continue to return to the sessions to share what they've been doing and to share their experiences with the incoming cohort. So maybe that will shift with time, but at present, no.
Great. Thank you for your answer. And Vivian, how do you think about intersectionality? One of the signs that I love in your PowerPoint presentation is one of your members holding up a sign in language, but then also underneath it, with a power fist held in the hand, Black Lives Matter. How do those connections work around energy and social justice and the other, and health and all those other pieces that are a part of the same extractive economy?
Yeah, definitely. I think that one thing that's been really helpful is to use the framework around just transition and to be able to name some of the root causes of so many of the issues that people are facing. And so to really understand the extractive economy through many different lenses has been really helpful for our members to understand that, the health issues that I'm facing are connected to the rising rents that I'm experiencing, to the unemployment that I'm seeing in my community. I think that having that analysis of that, it's because we live in a system that prioritizes profits, and it doesn't matter what sector you're looking at, whether it's housing or employment or energy, is that living in a system where that is the driving motive is going to result in the conditions that our communities are facing. And so I think that's been really helpful to have that framework and analysis to really understand kind of the common root causes that that underlie so many of the experiences that our members are facing. And then I think that there is a lot of work that is happening within our membership around connecting not only the different issues, but also with different communities, right? And so really, I think having the different trainings and the forums I was talking about and like exchanges, with different community groups has been really helpful for folks to be able to see, oh, it's not just me, as a Chinese immigrant in my Chinese immigrant communities that's experiencing this, but also Black folks, also brown folks, in other parts of the city and other neighborhoods that are also experiencing similar challenges. And so from that, I think is the conversation of like the intersectionality of issue areas and also the intersectionality of understanding the ways that our communities are being impacted by those very same forces. And so I think the photo that you highlighted, what we try to do, as part of intentionally thinking about leadership development is to build in that component for movement building and for our members to feel like they're part of a broader movement for social justice. And so that photo is actually from a Black Lives Matter march that happened in Oakland, where we went as APEN with many of our members, and we did a session beforehand to educate folks about and have conversations about what was happening around Black Lives Matter and why it was such an important issue and important movement, and folks really wanting to be part of that and to express support for it.
Great. I have a particular question I see here for you, Vivian, but well, let me go ahead and ask this question. And I cannot see these full questions, and I don't know, Ed or Kyla, if you can help me, because it's chopped off, but it seems like the question says, it seems, Vivian, from the photos that many of the event participants are older. And so I see the ... and I don't know the end of that question, but I guess it might be an issue of the role of youth in this movement, or are the pictures representative of your full base?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Yes, we do have our two membership bases, both in Chinatown and Richmond, are older, and some of our Richmond members have actually been with us since 1995. And so they've also grown older as the organization has grown older. And I think it's something where at different points in APEN's history, we have had youth organizing bases. And then I think a few years ago, we actually restarted up our organizing in Richmond with a youth base. And I think that we're still fostering kind of the linkages around the kind of the best ways to do intergenerational organizing and intergenerational exchange. Because right now I think that as part of building up the youth base, I think a lot of the events have been more youth oriented, but we are looking at ways to really connect across generations. The focus on youth organizing has actually really come from our members. So our members recognize, they're getting older. They want to see, they're always wanting to see more people join the movement, and I think they also recognize that the world that they are leaving behind, right, is going to be one that is for like their children and their grandchildren and the future. And so they also have been pushing for us to look at organizing more youth into our movement spaces. I should also mention that in Oakland, there's actually a great youth organization called APAL that organizes Asian youth. And so we tend to partner with them a lot rather than organizing our own base of youth.
Right. Well, for both of you, here's a question. How can research and academic communities support energy democracy?
That is a very good question. My my first thought would be obviously that there's a research aspect that does requires that technical know-how, that deep dive into fully understanding the complexity and the cross sections and how this influences this and all these different variables that we know are at play, but are sometimes a little unwieldy. And so definitely academia can help in kind of corralling that information and put it in some digestible form, which makes it easier for organizations like us to take a rather dense material and translate it into something that is more friendly to a layperson and definitely connects on the individual level. So I would believe they are part of the process too. It's just it may be one end and it ends with an infographic that's a simplified version of an academic paper, but it's all related to the same goal of creating knowledge and education to the people that are affected most.
And I might answer the question as well. In many ways, one of Emerald City's project is a community learning partnership, and we have a goal of training 5,000 community organizers over the next 5 years. And it's important to develop curriculum and to establish experiential learning opportunities for folks to understand this work. They understand energy democracy, understand the intersectionality of it, to make sure that particularly if these are not institutions where there are a lot of communities of color, that they have the cultural sensibilities of how to work alongside and not work for these communities. But we have to train the next generation. And if I see the signs out there anyway, the young generation, they get it. They are seeing that as older folks are leaving them a world in disarray, an environment in disarray, an economy in disarray, and they need to find the tools to do it. And I think the energy democracy frame provides them an understanding of what's at fault, what's at core. It's not white people versus black people versus brown people. We're not targeting the right thing. We're targeting a cultural value, a Western cultural value, an extractive economy that is undermining the 99% of us. And so having that kind of educational framework to understand health inequities and climate inequities and economic inequities as the same thing is an important role that I think academics can do and provide the research to support. And to train young folks to be organizers and advocates and not working to perpetuate the system, but to build alternative systems for this, as I continue to say, once in a century opportunity to change how we, the living economies, living communities that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think that it's really important. The partnership piece feels really important because often I think that we may not learn about or know about research that has been done, and then it may not actually even yield things that feel super relevant to like the conditions on the ground or the campaigns that are happening. And so I think the partnership piece is one where it could really help to strengthen, right, the type of research that is happening to really reflect more, I think, the pressing like questions that that research could be really helpful for, and also as an opportunity to actually engage community members in shaping kind of what the priorities of the research should be and what are some of the important questions that need to be answered. And I think and then I think I just want to echo too, I think Ashura's point about making the results and the findings accessible and relevant is also really important.
And a similar question that was asked from Maria about the role of community colleges can play in helping advance energy democracy. And I think this is my heart and soul in terms of knowing that major institutions like community colleges, communities can't change without real partnership. And I think Vivian just expressed this, real partnerships with community institutions in partnership with communities. And community colleges are particularly broadly accessible for learning and experience. And I think community colleges have like swung the pendulum too far right in terms of training our young people and not so young people to be economic actors, to find jobs, to be workforce development. And we have forgotten the core role and responsibilities of community colleges is to train our communities to be civic actors. And how are we developing curriculum and experience to know that they have a role in policy formulation and community change and advancing justice? So I would encourage you to go to our website and look at the Community Learning Partnership, how we're specifically working with community colleges in that space. And I need to ask you, what's our time limit at this point? Are we at the summation stage, or do we have time for a couple more questions?
We have time for several more. We have about 10 minutes left for questions.
Well, I'm going to, there's several many other questions here, but I wanted to take some prerogative to ask this question that we get all the time. I get all the time anyway, to see how, Vivian and Ashura, you answer this. And that is, this urgency again around climate change has spurred the movement towards 100% renewables, and utility scale renewables as seen as the one quick way that we can get to scale and address climate change quickly. Energy democracy focuses on local ownership, base building, control of clean energy resources, governance structures and infrastructure that is more decentralized, which is a slower movement, a slower process, and doesn't directly address, the urgency of addressing carbon emissions. How do you answer that question?
Very carefully, I think is how I would answer that. I see it, I understand the criticism to some extent, even the frustration of the fact that we can look around and just see the weather pattern and know that climate change is real, it's happening, and it's not waiting for us to get our act together. But on that same token, a lot of the issues that surround environmental justice, and cross-section with social justice and civil rights are also interconnected and interwoven that you can't really treat one symptom without dealing with the underlying illnesses. And so it is going to be a slow process. That doesn't mean that it's going to be a creeping process in the fact that you might not be able to get the entire nation on board at one given time or any given moment, but it's happening across the nation in small patches in this community or in this school district or in this rural area, and that aggregation will be the momentum that speeds it forward. So I think it's just a matter of understanding that both sides, one is immediate, one requires patience, but both are necessary to get to that green space that we're all looking to get to.
Denise, this is Ed. Can I take executive privilege here and just sort of weigh in on that question just a little bit?
I'd love for you. Please do.
So if you keep the sources of energy at the grid level, and then the ownership is maintained with the industrial users and with the IOUs, the publicly owned or the privately owned utilities that are serving the public. And that gets away from what Ashura was talking about, was the co-ops where you have more local control. Wresting control away from the local co-ops, I think, is the issue that she's dealing with. But keeping control of all of the assets at the IOU, the utility level, means that you're not able to exercise that local control. And I know you mentioned CCA's, community choice aggregation, which is really a big deal in California, and many communities are going in that direction, where the communities now are the providers of energy, and the sources where they get the energy can all be renewable. Is there more you can say about that, about what's happening in California, and why that really is an important community service, community support issue?
Well, I can do that, and I'll also maybe ask Vivian to weigh in. I'll start just by saying that there's actually 7 states that have community choice enabling legislation, which essentially takes power out of the hands of investor-owned utilities and gives it to essentially municipal municipal utility, municipal government. And it really allows for, the choice part comes in, allows for residents to decide what sources of energy do they want, and even pushes a little bit about how the energy infrastructure should be and could be redesigned to be more decentralized. Not many, however, it's a legislation that provides a vehicle for pushing energy democracy, but most of the community choice programs really do not, as Al likes to say, Weinrob say, leave community in community choice in terms of the governance or in any of the decision-making process. And so while it's a proper vehicle, there's a chapter in the book, Weinrob really speaks to what's the ideal and what's really happening and what we need to do to make sure that we are not reproducing the IOUs, investor-owned utilities, in a new dressing. And that's what's at issue. I think what Vivian's coalition has been doing in the East Bay is actually having probably the most dynamic conversation that I've been seeing, with multiple and diverse stakeholders really trying to figure out what does community choice look like and how can it be beneficial to a broader inclusive set of actors. And so, Vivian, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't quite see the issue as in stark contrast as being framed. You know, like, I actually think there are many local sites that are ready for immediate installation of solar and to be able to generate renewables as part of this back into the system. I think the challenge, though, has been to figure out where are the resources to support that and how to prioritize resources to support that. And so, you know, as part of the Alameda County CCA program conversation, we felt that it was really important to actually push for a local development business plan to be conducted as part of that formation of the CCA. And so organizations like East Bay Clean Energy Alliance and the local Clean Energy Alliance have been really instrumental in really pushing and making sure that that plan is developed. And the importance of that plan is really as an opportunity to identify all the sites that are possible within the jurisdictional area that actually are ready to be able to generate renewable energy locally. And I think that it hasn't, the results haven't come out yet in terms of the study and the plan, but I think the fact that there needed to be such a push to make sure that plan happened, I think still speaks to, I think, the need to prioritize kind of resources and attention on making that happen, because I do think there are a lot of available sites, but that they're not necessarily always prioritized and being included in the planning conversation. And so, yeah, so I would just argue, I do think there actually are a lot of opportunities for renewable energy to be happening locally. The other thing I'll lift up too is that, you know, if we go back and thinking about kind of how we actually got into the problem of climate change, you know, we see that so much of what created the climate problem that we're in is this notion of not having you know, distributed generation of power, not only energy power, but also economic and political power amongst many different communities, right? And so I think that in our urgency to develop a solution to this problem, I wouldn't want our solution to just continue to replicate the kind of the causes of the problem to begin with.
Great, thank you. Ashura, there's several, I don't know if there's one person, but several questions about your relationship, One's Voice relationship with the National Rural Electric Co-op Association. Are you connected, working with them? You have similar...
Go ahead, finish the question.
No, that's it.
We don't have a relationship where we are actively working with them. However, they have been a great source of information and knowledge and a resource in that regard, but not in the actual activities or events or day-to-day planning, no.
Great. There's a comment made by Maria that said the communities in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria are looking to not be connected to the electric grid anymore, and I wonder why that is. And these communities are being targeted for microgrids and community solars. Again, I think one of the important things that's coming that we want you to get out of this conversation is that the technology is there to allow us to go 100% renewable, but this energy democracy frame is beyond the question of the technology. It's not a tech solution that we're pushing. We're pushing who owns it, who controls it, how is it addressing the larger community and economic and social justice issues. So thank you for that comment, Maria. But our hope is that Puerto Rico will come out with a way to reinvent itself to solve the multiple and interconnected issues that Puerto Rico has faced. There's a lot of questions here, and you guys have to excuse me because I'm trying to vet through there's a lot of questions and trying to talk and facilitate at the same time, walk and chew at the same time. There's a lot of questions specifically about, is there energy democracy work in Arizona? Is it in Arkansas? Is it, people wondering to figure out how to connect to this work in their backyard. So I'm just going to not answer those questions, but by saying that if you connect with us, we will connect you to a larger network. There is, in fact, an energy democracy tour, not a book tour, but it's a tour of trying to find folks where this work is taking place in their communities within their particular context, and begin to create a larger database of knowledge and information and resources and networks so that we can grow this movement. So if you want more information about the Energy Democracy Tour and some of the organizations that are involved in that, I would just ask, we don't have a website up on it yet, but you can just go to the Emerald Cities, use my email, and then we'll get you connected wherever you're working.
Yeah, Denise, can I also add that Climate Justice Alliance is another sort of national network of communities all over the country. Many of the organizations are working on energy democracy, so that's another place that folks can go to try to connect with some local groups.
So let me ask you to answer this question, and because I think it speaks to what CJA is about. How are energy justice, energy democracy, and climate advocacy organizations working together? While each maintaining their focus.
And Denise, can you repeat again the different sectors that the question was asking about?
How are energy justice and energy democracy organizations and climate advocacy organizations working together while each maintain focus?
Well, I can start off. I mean, I think that there's actually many examples I can think of in California where where environmental justice, energy democracy, and sort of climate advocacy organizations are working together. And maybe the one thing that's rising to the top, just because I just had a call on it this morning, is there's been a people's climate mobilization that's happened every couple years, and there's actually going to be a huge one that's happening again in September of this year in response to the UN Global Climate Summit that's going to be happening in San Francisco. And again, that's just an example, I think, of a large-scale mobilization that is going to be bringing together many of the different groups to come together to talk about the need for climate solutions to come from the most impacted communities, to talk about the intersections, between climate and many different issues like jobs and healthcare, and also an opportunity for many different types of organizations to be working together to make that event a success.
Right. And in many ways, it does speak to the intersectionality of the energy democracy work and whether and how people come together across their unique interests depends upon the context. It depends upon the leadership. It depends upon the political framework you give to each of these. So it's not guaranteed that everyone's working together, but in many places that does happen.
Mhm.
This is go ahead.
Oh, and I would just add to that, I think in spaces where that is happening, one thing that I have found very helpful is to actually have very clear like principles and protocols for working together up front. So, principles that represent kind of the values that the different partners want to put at the center of whatever is being organized, and then the protocols for how to work together well. I think can be really helpful in just bringing clarity to the ways that different organizations may play different roles and how to capture, I think, the collective vision and unity, even though individual organizations may have sort of different histories, right, on the issue.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's very important to lead with values and principles. I think we're getting close to the end. I want to just throw this last one out. How can base building and movement building strategies ultimately confront monopoly and military interests? What kinds of discussions are folks in your organizations having about this? Well, I think the real, one of the core elements of energy democracy is to wrest control of utility monopoly and put energy into the hands of the community for its use value as opposed to its commodification. And so energy democracy is confronting utility monopoly very directly in terms of its local ownership and local control issues. And the military interests are related in that we're talking about renewable energy sources, and to the extent that many wars are fought over land and natural resources, maybe there's an indirect effect on and how we address sort of the military culture, this global military culture that we have, but I don't have an answer to that. Any comments, Ashura or Vivian, about this question of monopoly and military interests?
I would only I agree with everything you said, and I would add to maybe the governmental interests, not addressing the military issue because that's just outside of my knowledge base, but monopolies in any sector for any reason rely primarily on the ignorance and acceptance of the situation by those that are supposedly served by them. And in this instance, it's a generalized ignorance of not understanding where your energy comes from, how your energy is produced, what relationship do you have with your energy provider, and the acceptance of, well, how it is, this is how it's going to be in this. Once you attack those two foundations, I think that will address the monopolies and to eventually pull them down, because they depend on those two things to remain in power and to continue to keep control over resources.
Thank you. There are many.
And I would
Go ahead.
I would just add on the militarization piece. I think what it made me reflect on is, the organizing that is done in many homeland countries, like the Philippines, for example, which is the one I'm most familiar with, as well as, even looking at the situation at Standing Rock and seeing how that confrontation, right, of very powerful forces around energy did invite, military repression. And so that is an issue that I think, we do need to be talking about more, and just be able to understand the connections and kind of how, in some ways, the military and forces that may end up actually serving to protect the corporations, and that as part of like the resistance and the struggle to advance energy democracy and to make it a powerful framework, that we may encounter that type of situation.
Thanks. So time check, Ed. Should we wrap or?
Yes, we're at the end of the hour. How about a summary from each of you?
Okay, that'd be great. Let me just make there are a lot of questions that went unanswered, and I really, really thank you all for actually caring about this subject and having such insightful questions. And there are a set of questions, particularly around co-ops, solar co-ops, that I will just say buy the book, because we actually do have several chapters that's really dedicated to solar co-ops and this whole idea that folks that are even in middle income suburban communities and how they are actually being politicized, becoming politicized around energy democracy as they try and develop consumer and buyer co-ops. So the book itself is a tool for you to understand the theory, understand some indigenous values that are infusing this sort of new vision about the kind of life that we want for our children, our children's children. It gives really powerful narratives, two of which you've heard today, about what's actually happened in communities. It gives sort of a how-to manual component about how to build some of this work, particularly around solar co-ops, how to change and what kind of policies are needed. And then ultimately, the end chapter is how we need to be working together in solidarity to build a bigger energy democracy movement, and we want you all to be a part of that. And then my parting comment is that, again, I just see it in the way that we built the railroads and other infrastructure. This is a way for us to reshape and redefine America to be truly democratic, and we cannot blow this opportunity, even with climate change and this urgency. Let's take this moment to figure this out right. I would ask Vivian and Ashura your closing thoughts.
Yeah.
I would just, go ahead, Vivian.
Go ahead, Ashura. No, go ahead.
Okay. I would just say that throughout your work, whatever your particular avenue is, whatever you're in for your organization, I think the key component to success, at least in my experience and the experience of One Voice, has always been it has to be community-based. You cannot come in as the expert and the savior of I'm going to fix your problems, because if you're not from that community, you honestly don't know what those problems are. And that is the first step in helping that community, assisting that community in overcoming that challenge. So just that's my parting thought. The community is always going to be the center of change, and they're going to have the strongest motivation. They're going to have the strongest passion. They're going to be in the best position to see that whatever the challenges are, environmental, climate change, economic, whatever those challenges are, they're in the best position to meet and overcome them with assistance and resources from organizations like us.
Thank you, Ashura.
Yeah, and then I was just going to add that, for me, I'm really reminded of the Cornel West quote, that's something along the lines of justice is what love looks like in public. And I think that many of our members really approach the work of justice from a place of love, from a place of wanting to see a better world for not only themselves, but also for their children and their children's children.
Great. That's a great wrap-up. Denise, Vivian, and Ashura, thank you for your presentations today and your discussion. It was really enlightening, and the passion that you have for the issue really comes through. And you made so many important points here that I've come away with. I mean, the concept that it's the local community that has to take charge of their future. We've heard that from other communities that are facing similar problems, like Detroit and many of the communities in Louisiana facing sea level rise, that you can't come in from the outside and expect to address and face and work with the local community and address the problems adequately. The role of community colleges, I think, are really important. And Denise, the point you made about civic education and not just focusing on training the next workforce, which is critically important, but not understanding the tools of government and how you can impact government at the local level is really critical. And I think this country doesn't pay enough attention to civic education. The whole concept of energy democracy being able to be led and taken charge of at the community level is just so critical, because the energy infrastructure drives social structures, and if you're not in control of that and the the resources are controlled elsewhere and the benefits, the major benefits, are going elsewhere too. It really impacts the social structure of the community. So understanding that is really critical, and your organizations helping people do that, I think, just a major contribution to the country. So to all three of you, thank you very much. And I also want to thank the audience that stayed with us right to the end. And if we're able to, maybe we can get more of those questions answered after the session is over. Maybe we can find a way to do that. I also want to remind you that Island Press does offer a discount to the book. I really encourage you to buy it. There'll be a lot of tips and a lot of examples of how you can move forward in your own community. And then also, this is the concept of local control of resources, especially energy, is really an urban resilience issue. And so I just encourage you to participate in the Island Press Urban Resilience Project that's underwritten by the Kresge Foundation. Resilience at islandpress.org is a way to engage with Island Press on the issue. Again, I thank our panelists, Denise, Vivian, and Ashura. Thank you very much for all of your insights. And I hope to see all of you again, all of the audience, on a subsequent SSF webinar. And with that, I'm going to end the session.